Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. I hope you've had a wonderful experience here at the 11th Women, Peace, and Security Symposium. I appreciate you joining us for this panel today on strengthening maritime security. I'm Captain Andrea Cameron, for those who don't know me, and I teach in the National Security Affairs Department here at the Naval War College. Now, I've had the honor of supporting this Women, Peace, and Security event since 2017. And for today's talk on maritime security, we're going to approach it in kind of two different ways. First, we're going to talk about what's happening on the water in the maritime environment that affects human security and humanitarian assistance. These are kind of operationally focused issues. This will be followed by the kind of policies and practices regarding the inclusion of women in maritime forces. So that'll be the second part of our panel. As I said, up first, we'll talk about a variety of maritime insecurity issues and those gender dynamics that go with them. To do this, we have two experts that work with our geographic combatant commands. First is Miss Maryruth Belsey Priebe, and she works at aXXelerate, a firm that works to bring gender perspectives into every security conversation. Previously, she was the Director for Women, Peace, and Security Programs and a Senior Fellow at Pacific Forum International, where she worked closely with U.S. Indo-PACOM's WPS office. Today, through aXXelerate, she implements U.S. Indo-PACOM and Canadian Armed Forces WPS initiatives in the Indo-Pacific. She also researches solutions to the uniquely gendered security threats faced by communities dealing with the impact of climate change. So her presentation today explores the increasing intersection between defense and humanitarian assistance disaster response, and highlights the critical importance of integrating gender perspectives into disaster response planning. Our second speaker is Miss Carrie Compton, a repeat speaker at the WPS Symposium due to her popularity. And she has been a gender advisor for U.S. Naval Forces Europe and Africa since 2022. Prior to this position, Carrie Compton is a pilot in the Marine Corps, she still is, and she's been doing many tactical and operational level jobs in the Marine Corps, Special Forces Command in Africa. Today she'll be talking about how U.S. Naval Forces Europe and Africa are working on illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing and forced labor. These pose a significant and growing problem not only to the fisheries sector, but for maritime security as a whole. IUUF impacts on various aspects of society, including gender dynamics, and addressing these gender impacts require comprehensive strategies to empower women, enhance law enforcement, and promote sustainable fishing practices. So our first two speakers today will be that what's happening on the water and how is it intersecting with our geographic combatant commands and their WPS work. So kicking us off, I'd like to introduce Ms. Maryruth Belsey Priebe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Captain Cameron, and thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. Today I'm just going to explore how having a gender-responsive approach to humanitarian assistance and disaster response, or HADR, as I'm sure you all know, improves responses that we have, especially my experience comes from the Asia-Pacific. By considering how the unique needs and perspectives of women can lead to more effective and equitable outcomes, we see that having a gender perspective is an important element of effective HADR. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you are going to agree that looking at the nexus of gender, climate, and security is crucial for effective disaster response operations, including in the US Navy. And I have many devices that I have to balance, so I hope, I'm technologically advanced. So why does the gender, climate, security, or the triple nexus matter for maritime security? Well, climate-induced disasters have arrived with greater intensity and 10 years earlier than scientific projections had anticipated, which has fundamentally transformed both human and international security. By the end of 2023, there were 300 million people globally who needed aid, and that was that cost $47 billion in 2024 in order to provide that relief. According to the Military Responses to Climate Hazards, or MIRCH platform, 68 countries, a large percentage, have requested assistance as a result of disasters in their countries. So at this increasing pace of deployment, it has raised serious concerns about the military readiness and capacity of militaries around the world. I've done a lot of research on this triple nexus, specifically on the human and the international and national security issues, and in my perspective, there are 5 ways to look at the triple nexus of gender, climate, and security, and how they might be applicable to the maritime domain. So the first is that gendered insecurities create direct national security challenges, and when climate disasters exploit gender-based vulnerabilities, the resulting displacement and resource competition can destabilize entire communities. Localized instabilities multiplied across a region create broader security threats that demand military attention and resources. In second place is the maladaptive responses that are often driven by gender dynamics that threaten regional stability as well. When climate stress triggers practices like early marriage, as Dr. Hudson was noting, or forced migration, it doesn't just harm the individuals, it creates population movements and social tensions that can destabilize entire regions. Third, the emergence of gendered patterns in climate-driven crime and violence directly threaten international security as well, and internal security. When women often resort to things like survival crimes, men also become more involved in organized crime and resource theft, and both of these signal a breakdown in the social order. More concerning, the pathway from climate stress to sexual and gender-based violence often intersects with broader security threats, as Dr. Hudson was saying, including the growth of non-state armed groups. Fourth, military response frameworks must evolve to address these challenges effectively. Gender-responsive approaches aren't just about equality, they're about mission success. Whether in disaster response or regional stability operations, forces that effectively integrate gender considerations consistently achieve better security outcomes. And finally, the gender-climate security nexus needs to be understood because the gender dynamics of leadership in climate crisis are very important, and they have direct implications for national security. Excluding women from disaster response planning and implementation means leaving out half of the talent. By understanding and leveraging everyone's perspectives, security forces can better predict, prevent, and respond to climate-related threats to regional stability. These intersections, these 5 intersections, demonstrate why gender considerations must be central to national security planning in an era of climate change. So, how is the U.S. doing at this nexus? There are 3 main policies that acknowledge this triple nexus. The first is the U.S. Strategy and National Action Plan on WPS, which acknowledges that the need for protecting women and girls from sexual and gender-based violence and calls for deeper understanding of those issues and the root causes of those issues. The U.S. AIDS Strategic Framework for Early Recovery, Risk Reduction, and Resilience recognizes the disproportionate impacts of disaster on women and emphasizes the need for consultation throughout program life cycles with women. And I would say the most comprehensive policy is the U.S. strategy to respond to the effects of climate change on women, which emphasizes intersectionality, local contextualization, and anticipating SGBV, or sexual and gender-based violence, in climate-related disasters. So these policies demonstrate a growing recognition of the triple nexus in disaster response. Implementation, however, is challenging. I would say there are 3 things that are challenging for this particular nexus. The first is that there are too few personnel within the U.S. military that understand the complexity of these challenges. The second is that the triple nexus, as I've mentioned, is an incredibly complex issue. I've developed a framework that's over 500 pages that looks at all of these dimensions on 15 different indicators. And it's very nuanced and needs to be contextualized. And that's the third problem, and that is that it's unique to each individual location, so we can't just apply a blanket approach to how we treat the triple nexus. So, solutions. The first, and this is not rocket science, is that we need to have more people who understand these issues, more gender advisors or Gen Ads, and more gender focal points. But I think, and I think the U.S. military is trying their best to rapidly train people, and my colleagues at U.S. Indo-PACOM, whom I've worked with, have been training people as quickly as they can. But there still are far too few of them. My recommendation, which comes from consultations with people who work in this space, is that we need to have a gender advisor for every combatant commander, and we need to have a gender focal point for every J directorate at the very least. Yeah, that's the main point of this one. My second suggestion is that we need to have enhanced gender mainstreaming. So all personnel have at least a basic understanding of women, peace, and security, but especially those who are going to be interacting with disaster survivors. The benefit, in my view, is that I think HADR is one of the quickest and easiest ways for military folk to understand why WPS is important. And so by training within the specific space of HADR and WPS, I think that can have better, higher adoption within the military and more quickly. And the third solution is practical checklists. This is something that I think Japan has pioneered. They have this really great checklist that is for evacuation shelters that looks at all the gendered things that need to be taken into consideration following a disaster, just specifically for the shelters. But I think this idea could be taken further. So one of the 7 projects that we ran for Indo-PACOM recently was our Gender in Health and Climate Security workshop series, which involved the 7 countries noted there, and it was focused on CivMil cooperation. The project recognized that effective disaster response requires strong partnerships between defense forces and local women's organizations. And through collaborative discussions, participants explored practical approaches to addressing gendered climate insecurities during disasters. And the workshop emphasized feminist consultation principles like co-creation, intersectionality, and participatory learning, which is also identified in the U.S. strategy that I mentioned earlier. One of the primary outputs of this project was something we call the Gendered Risk Assessment and Action Planning tool, which has essentially a series of questions that look at both pre-disaster, during disaster, and post-disaster along 11 different indicators, and allows communities to localize or contextualize what they need to take care of within a disaster scenario for their particular communities. And this is sort of taking the Japan example a little bit further by allowing for contextualization, but I think future development should involve more than just a shelter checklist, but should involve things like search and rescue, medical centers, aid distribution, and so on, so that you look at the whole range of issues that might have gendered considerations within a disaster. And obviously for the different branches of the military, there could be checklists depending on the types of responses that each one would have. So the navies would be unique from the Army, and that would be country specific as well. Just to give you a couple of examples of what this GRAPT, or Gendered Risk Assessment and Action Planning tool, looked at. Here are some of just a very small sampling of the different indicators that we looked at. One was early warning, making sure that women and men equally have evacuation technology such as cell phones and internet connections. Making sure if women don't have the ability to leave their homes without a male family member, that there's plans to help them get out of the way of a disaster if they don't have a male family member present. Making sure that infrastructure is gender sensitive, so if escape routes to rural communities where women often live are not passable as a result, there should be alternate evacuation routes for those women. During a disaster, making sure that food aid and other resource distribution is gender equitable. Looking at healthcare, making sure that cooling centers are gender sensitive so that women and men both have access, that sexual health and reproductive rights and supplies are available, and that care for men in search and rescue is taken seriously, especially on the mental health toll of doing search and rescue, which can be very high, and men generally tend not to ask for help. And then post-disaster, again, looking at mental health, looking at the effects of increases in unpaid care work as a result of disaster and the gender differences. And then making sure that there's a continuity of education, especially for girls, because that is often disrupted as a result of disasters. So bringing us back, the 3 recommendations that I have is that we need to have more gen eds and GFPs and in all of the branches and all the J directorates, having more comprehensive training, which I think could be a great inroad to socializing WPS principles, and then maybe developing practical checklists. And one of the things I forgot to mention is the GRAPT tool that I mentioned is still 40 pages long, which is not practical. So I think a lot more work needs to be done on that to trim it down and to make it more essentialized. And I think that's it. The frameworks and findings that I've presented today are just scratching the surface of how to enhance both operational effectiveness and regional security outcomes. I do believe that community by community, if we are able to engage CivMil partnerships to shape response plans and checklists ahead of climate crises, we could bolster stability and prevent crises from turning into disasters, thereby reducing the need for massive response efforts from the military. In the process, we'd also socialize WPS principles throughout military institutions and as one of the most tangible and sticky or understandable ways for people to grasp WPS principles. And I'm happy to chat with any of these. This is just a tiny sampling, but happy to discuss how we might contextualize or, contextualize these ideas for the maritime security space. So thank you for your time.
Thank you to Maryruth Belsey Priebe. She's talked about the gender, climate, and security nexus, her work at Indo-PACOM, and what I was really looking forward to, the GRAPT, the Gendered Risk Assessment and Action Planning Tool. Next, we'd like to talk to Carrie Compton and her work as the gender advisor at U.S. Naval Forces Europe and Africa. Carrie?
Good afternoon, everyone. I actually want to agree with you on having a gender advisor and at least a GFP in each directorate. I actually recommend 2 for continuity. So, sorry, little digression. Hello, everyone. My name is Carrie Compton. I'm the gender advisor for U.S. Naval Forces, Africa, Europe, and Sixth Fleet. And today I want to give a very brief overview on a complex issue. It's gender considerations in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, as well as the rise in forced labor at sea due to IUF. Well, let's see if I'm technologically savvy. So naval commands within and around the AFRICOM and Indo-PACOM areas of responsibility have been significantly focusing on their efforts on countering IUF, and for a very, very good reason. So today I'll be talking about the rise in awareness of IUF and how it has and is detrimentally impacting maritime security with effects that are felt well beyond a country's economic exclusion zone, or EEZ, and why it is imperative that a gender perspective is considered with countering these maritime threats. In that same vein, there's also a rise in forced labor at sea and how that directly ties to IUF activities. So before we delve into the gender considerations for IUF and forced labor and why it is important to maritime security forces, we need to understand the history behind the increase in the global demand for fish, the stock and fisheries, and how that engendered the increase in IUF activities worldwide, the impacts which are very long-lasting and potentially could be cataclysmic. So the rise in demand, okay. There we go. So the rise in demand for fish will continue to increase, even with efforts by Western countries to import for sustainable and reputable countries. Unfortunately, using only reputable sources for fish has the associated higher cost, and economic incentives will always favor the cheaper version. With continued trends for increasing demand for fish stocks and no reprieve or ability to effectively counter it, IUF activities will increase as it is a lucrative business, accounting for almost $9 to $17 billion annually and accounting for up to 30% of total catches in high-value fish and can be upwards of 3 times the permitted amount. For Western countries, the economic losses from IUF ranges between 26 and 50 billion US dollars annually. However, the economic impacts are far much worse for countries that rely on their own fish stocks for sustenance and job security. So almost 30% of the world fisheries are overexploited, with over 60% already being fully exploited. The largest importers of fish are the EU, followed very closely behind by United States and China. But why is that? So over the last couple of decades, of which data has been collected, the consumption of animal-based proteins across the world has substantially increased. This can be accounted for due to increased populations, rising affluence, urbanization, and changing of eating habits. When the cost of raising land-based animal protein starts to become unsustainable due to rising costs and available plant-based proteins required to sustain those animals, the demands for the most cost-effective fish-based proteins will increase. Another factor that exacerbates those numbers is the ability to go further out to sea for longer periods of time and to haul even larger catches. So the above graph actually shows the changes in seafood and fish consumption every 30 years from 1961 to 2021. It was not until the early 1990s that aquaculture and fish farming started to increase with the rising seafood consumption. By 2020, around 49% of the world's supply of fish, crustaceans, and mollusks was farmed rather than caught, which is an increase from 13% in 1990. However, fish farming requires fish meal to sustain, which in turn increases the demand and also limits the food supply for larger fish out in the ocean. We can see how this potentially could turn out. Overall, the surging global demand for fish has been at odds with efforts to avoid overfishing and preserve marine wildlife. So the cost of IUF practices is felt all over the world, but I'm going to focus on one region that is of particular interest for the U.S. Naval Forces, Africa, and how IUF has affected such a large area so detrimentally. In many, if not all, of these coastal communities within the Gulf of Guinea, fish procurement means jobs and sustenance. Most people along the Gulf of Guinea have relied heavily on the procurement of the fish, and because most people within this region live well below the international poverty line, fish has been one of the few dependable livelihoods for many generations. When you add IUF caused by distant water fishing activities and the inability to control overfishing, many of those artisanal fisheries are now required to venture further out of the normal territorial and contingent zones in vessels or boats that are not made for the high seas. Local fishers have lost revenue due to drops in accessible catch and have been forced to go further out to sea, significantly increasing their safety risk and leading to higher levels of mortality. I'm going to give you some context on how IUF activities have affected these coastal communities. In Côte d'Ivoire, the coastal catch fell nearly 40% between 2003 and 2020. In Ghana, the catch of smaller fish dropped by 59% in the last 26 years. It is believed Nigeria is around the same, in the same similar situation and has similar trends, affecting the livelihoods of 10% of that population, which equates to 24 million people. So the projections in these three countries suggest catches will continue to plunge by another 50% by 2020. In smaller countries with even more limited maritime security capabilities like Sierra Leone and the Gambia, IUF activities, especially for the smaller fish that make the fish meal, have decreased weekly hauls from 100 kilograms per individual to just 4 kilograms. The depletion of fish stocks and the potential for the fishery collapse caused by IUF are significant, but the causes for the potential collapse are actually manifold and include rising ocean temperatures, as well as overfishing by artisanal fisheries who are just trying to maintain their livelihood. So why is it important for maritime forces to consider gender? IUF has detrimental effects on the local, regional, and international economy, local and regional food security, employment, the marine environment, and has links to transnational organized crimes. When distant water fishing and illegal fishing takes away a person's livelihood, that person or family needs to find substitutes to make that ends meet. If there is limited to no opportunities to make up for those lost wages and sustenance, this becomes a crisis. People are forced to either venture further out to sea and risk their lives, join these fleets of trawlers and potentially be subject to forced labor or even harmful labor practices, or join organized crime syndicates just to make up for those lost wages. So why do we need to take in consideration of gender? Most, if not all, artisanal fishermen in and around the Gulf of Guinea are male. The thing is, IUF affects all genders, male, women, boys, and girls, both land and on the sea. Maritime insecurity displayed in many of these coastal countries has shown no respect for border or gender. Although men make up the vast majority of seafarers, women are present at all stages of the marine and artisanal fisheries value chain, from the pre-financing and preparation of fish outings to the reception, processing, and marketing of those fish. Protein intake in sub-Saharan and poor coastal communities accounts for 22 to 50% of their protein intake. And so women are a crucial contribution to these fisheries and are essential in assuring food security, enhancing community stability. These communities are a space for men and women to earn an income, foster social cohesion, and generate tax revenues for the national economies. When IUF takes away that source of income and sustenance, it's not only a maritime security threat, but a gender threat. When men and young boys are forced to work on distant water trawlers, which makes up the majority of IUF activities, they are now taking away women's contribution to the economy. Not only that, but aboard these trawlers, there's a lot of inhumane practices as well on those foreign flag vessels, and they are rarely subjected to laws within those EEZs. When there is a lack of maritime security capabilities and enforceable laws, and a community that is reeling economically and desperate for work, those foreign vessels have basically carte blanche over the lives of those seeking work. These men and young boys are subjected to long hours, no pay, bad working conditions with no medical assistance, and an overall sense of indifference to human life and suffering by the hands of these local and foreign flag vessels. When they are unable to provide for their families on shore that rely on this seafarer, now the women and children are detrimentally affected. So how do we try and counter these maritime security threats? There have been proposals by the EU and the UN on how to counter IUF activities and cover legal, institutional, and economic and social dimensions that require the involvement of national, regional, and international fisheries authorities. And although there are already many laws and regulations in place designed to combat IUF, in many cases the practical implementation is still lacking, and even if it is implemented, the effects is largely unknown. Even where the political will exists, it's still a long way to go in rendering that will into concrete action. And this includes having the funding, manning, and vessels to properly surveil, and whether the local authorities are even able to effectively enforce. Questions you need to ask is the government prone to outside investors and may look the other way? The best way to decrease IUF activities is to hit them where it hurts the most, their wallet. Actions which increase the level of penalty and the cost of IUF operators could have the highest potential net payoff. Countries and regions must work together to be most effective and can do this by eliminating tax havens, restricting accessibility to goods and services for IUF operators, such as landing fee, fuel fees, and apply extraterritorial domestic sanctions to citizens engaged in IUF activities and operations. To combat forced labor at sea, countries must work together in order to ratify and implement human rights conventions relating to crews on fishing vessels, as well as improve economic and social situations in countries and regions supplying those cheap crews. How can the maritime security operators be successful? They must use cooperative governance initiatives and guidance programs in order to enforce higher penalties, more efficient monitoring, control, and surveillance measures, and increase the use of catch and trade documentation schemes. However, in order to have long-lasting effects, a cooperative approach across countries is needed. In the case of unreported fishing, the more generalized use of onboard observers could be helpful. Private legal operators have a strong incentive to ensure that their markets are not undermined by IUF and should be co-opted into taking a more active role in combating IUF activities. More effort could be made to convince legal fishers to set up their own, basically, name and shaming on those activities that affect their operations, and with a view to put moral pressure on illegal fishing operators and the change in the culture in the industry. Countries need to cooperate to include all interested parties and establish management arrangements in areas of the high seas that are unregulated. While more regulation, including monitoring, control, and surveillance, may be a central part in the overall combating of IUF activities, they may be costly and hard to implement. So public authorities need to weigh their cost against the potential benefit, and when doing so, must also consider a gender perspective. La fin.
Thank you to Carrie Compton and her excellent explanation of kind of a non-traditional security threat that are involving maritime forces around the world, as well as our own geographic combatant command's interest. All right, next, as I promised, we're going to kind of shift gears. We're going to move from kind of these what's happening out in the maritime environment to what's happening to maritime forces. So our next speaker is one of the leaders in this area, but I just want to remind everyone, after this, we'll have the opportunity for questions to all of our panelists on either one of these kind of areas that we're looking at. As a reminder, a question has a falling tone. It ends with a question mark, and if you're brief about your question, we can get more of them in. All right, without further ado, I'm going to introduce retired Vice Admiral Alvaro Martinez from the Argentine Navy. He'll present the Inclusive Maritime Security Formula, the IMS, and it's a framework that combines traditional security elements with inclusive components, so I look forward to hearing all about that. Just as a little background, Vice Admiral Martinez is an Argentine naval officer whose career spanned over 4 decades. That includes that he served in combat during the Malvinas War. You might know it as the Falklands War. He also had a couple of commanded sea tours, a squadron command, such leadership roles as Commander of Naval Education and Chief of Naval Personnel and Welfare. And he also had academic leadership roles to include president of their Naval University Institute and president of the Argentine Naval War College. He was here in Newport at the Naval Command College back in 2002, and he was most recently a visiting scholar at the U.S. National Defense University in their Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies. In 2015, he was recognized by Argentina's Minister of Defense for his role in integrating gender perspectives within the armed forces, and that reflects his commitment to inclusive leadership. Sir, we're so honored to have you here today, and I look forward to what you're going to present.
Thank you very much. Okay, the technical, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Many thanks to the Naval War College, especially to the president of Naval War College, my friends and my classmate, 2002, many years ago, and especially to Dr. Sayas Amin for this opportunity to share some ideas with us at this panel and this audience about strengthening maritime security through the inclusion of women. I am truly impressed with the presentation, and I have been a wake-up call to issues that sometimes one underestimate, and they are very serious and affect the national security. When I listen the presentation before, I say, hey, we live in another part of the world. Because when Mrs. Hudson present a map, and I say the red areas and the green areas, I live in the green area, I say, hey, what happened in the other side of the world? No? In today's interconnected world, where security threats grow increasingly complex, strengthening national security through maritime security is more critical than ever, perfectly aligning with this year's theme, Rethinking Global Security in a Complex World. My proposal, Female Inclusion in Maritime Security, a Global Imperative, emphasizes that integrating women in maritime security is not merely about representation, is a strategic necessity. By leveraging diverse perspectives, we can enhance national defense, improve crisis response, and drive innovation to tackle the challenges of our rapidly evolving security landscape. As global threats evolve, we must ask ourselves, as we fully utilizing the potential of all our resources, including women, to safeguard our nations? Okay, I hope at the end of this presentation, I hope to demonstrate that women's integration is not just a value, it's a cornerstone for building a stronger and more adaptable national security. First, for me, inclusive maritime security emphasizes the critical role of women in maritime operation through equitable participation. To conceptualize this, okay, go back. Okay, to conceptualize this, we have developed the IMS formula that integrates technology plus education plus governance multiplied by leadership, participation, and innovation of the women. This formula integrates traditional security pillars with the transformative power of inclusion. Each component contributes uniquely enriching maritime operation with diverse perspectives and fostering innovative solutions. Let's explore the core elements. Female leadership. Women in leadership introduce diverse approaches to decision-making and crisis management, enhancing collaboration and innovation. Studies confirm that women in leadership boosts team performance and adaptability. Equitable participation, ensuring that women participate fully across maritime role strengths, both operational readiness and effectiveness. Inclusive innovation, including women in technical and operational roles, brings forward fresh ideas for technology and system designs. With these core elements, the Argentine Navy has made strides in integrating women, reshaping traditional roles and opening new opportunities. Here are some milestones that highlight this evolution and the Navy's commitment to enhancing national security through inclusive maritime security. As you could see on the slide, key milestone in the integration of women into the Argentine Navy illustrate that the transformative power of inclusive policy for 4 decades. 1980, women joined the Navy as enlisted personnel, initially limited to nursing and operational roles with no opportunity to serve aboard ships. The maximum rank was Senior Chief Petty Officer. 1 year later, 1981, women were allowed to join as officer, but a staff officer, no officer of line, no combat officer. In 2002, it was a turning point. Why? Because the women were permitted to serve as naval officers and naval warfare officers, and enlisted women could serve on ships. The maximum achievable rank was raised to Master Chief Petty Officers, and additional specialties were opened to female personnel. 2006, the first female graduated from the Naval Academy, and in 2010, the first female graduated in the Marine Corps. In 2012, a first female submarine graduated. Tragically, she lost her life in the San Juan submarine incident. That was a pity. 2015, a woman achieved the rank of Rear Admiral as an engineer in the Staff Corps. And in 2023, the first female graduated from the Naval Aviation Academy. Integrating women into the defense area required extensive changes across various dimensions: legal frameworks, combat unit facilities, educational curricula, and created a dedicated department within the Ministry of Defense and the Armed Forces focused on women's affairs. As director of the education, one of my major responsibilities was overseeing the midlife refit of our tall ship, Ara Fragata Libertad, to ensure suitable infrastructure for all personnel on board. That was the first time that we embarked ensign female and males. That was very critical. Today, women represent nearly 26% of active personnel in the Argentine Navy, totaling approximately 4,300 individuals. As shown on the slide, 19% of these officers are officers, and 27% are enlisted personnel. Among female officers, 30% are in the command line, while 70% are in the staff corps. This distribution is due to the first woman graduating from as officer for warships in 2006. Now, the Naval Academy has equal numbers of male and females graduates each year. In my experience, women's inclusion has driven meaningful innovation that reinforce national security. One example is in a crisis response. During severe flooding in a riverine region, women on the crisis response team developed a protocol to prioritize the most vulnerable, significantly reducing response time and insurance than critical medical aid and essential resources reached thus in need more efficiently. And another example is in research and development. The Navy's first female Rear Admiral was an engineer specializing in information technology for data automation systems. She was the first woman to serve as Director of Research and Development in the Navy, bringing not only technical expertise, but also a leadership style that fostered innovation in technology, equipment design, and problem solving. Another example is in peacekeeping mission. Maybe you are deployed in peacekeeping operation. We find a different female from Argentina. This example highlights how diverse perspectives enhance problem solving, operation effectiveness, and resilience. To build an inclusive maritime future within a national security framework, we need proactive policies, mentorship, and equitable opportunities. Here are some actionable steps. Advocate for policy change. Promote policies that support inclusivity for women at all levels, from recruitment through to leadership. Second, promote mentorship programs. Establish mentorship initiatives that empower women to seek leadership roles, connect with experienced leaders, and take on decision-making positions both on shore and sea. Third, prioritize inclusive training and education. Ensure that training programs are designed with inclusivity in mind, preparing all personnel to contribute equally to national security. As conclusion, women's integration must be acknowledged as a cornerstone of national security, a vital component for advancing resilience and stability. By embracing the core elements of the inclusive maritime security formula, we can transform the maritime sector into one that is not only stronger, but also more innovative and adaptable. When women are positioned as contributors to smart and sustainable security strategies, inclusivity evolves from being a value to a strategic advantage. Today, women make up nearly 26% of the Argentine Navy, contributing in critical areas such as crisis response, cyber defense, and leadership. These figures reflect more than progress. They represent the strength and innovation inclusivity brings to the national security. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you to Vice Admiral Martinez. What a great topic, especially the concept of the strategic necessity of the inclusion of women was fascinating. I appreciated your timeline, the demographics, and the call to action you had. And your art is very good as well. All right, our final speaker today is someone I've known for years because of our mutual involvement in women, peace, and security. This is Captain Junko Kawashima of the Japan Maritime Defense Force. And she's going to cover the current circumstances and initiatives within the Japan Maritime Defense Force regarding female uniformed personnel, as well as their Ministry of Defense's comprehensive women, peace, and security efforts. As a little bit of biographical information, she has completed her XO and CO tours at sea and done staff assignments in the N2, N3, and N5 shops at the Maritime Staff Office. She's been a liaison officer to the headquarters of 5th Fleet and U.S. Naval CENTCOM, and a liaison officer to the commander of U.S. Naval Forces Japan. From 2017 to 2019, she worked for the NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace, and Security, and she's currently serving as their Command and Staff College, the director of their International Program Office. Welcome back, Captain. I give you the floor.
Thank you for introduction, Andrea. Good afternoon, everyone. Konnichiwa. Thank you. I'm Captain Kawashima from Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. I am so honored to have this wonderful opportunity to participate in the U.S. Naval War College Women, Peace and Security Symposium again and discuss on maritime security and WPS. And also, I'm excited to join the Strengthening Maritime Security panel today, as I will be able to learn from everyone. Today, I'm going to talk about the efforts and the progress for empowerment of uniformed female in the GMSDF and the initiative to promote women, peace, and security. First, I'd like to talk about the changes and the efforts regarding uniformed female in Japan Self-Defense Force from the statistical data. Upper left shows total number of uniformed female personnel. You can see that it has been gradually growing since 1976 when JMSDF started female recruitment. Upper right, graph 2 indicates that the number of female personnel occupies approximately 20% of whole recruitment in 2022. We have been making an effort to expand the number of female recruitments. It is clear that the total number of JSDF personnel has been decreased due to Japan's declining birth rate, as you can look at the graph 3, indicated lower bottom. Therefore, it is critically significant for us to recruit female personnel to maintain our capability. It has been imperative for us not only promoting recruitment for females, but improving work environment and opportunities for females. This slide shows the effort in terms of regulations and guidelines to improve work environment and promote active participation for uniformed female. The regulations and guidelines have been developed in accordance with the increased number of females in JSDF. Leaves for pregnancy, childbirth, and parenting have been already granted since 1954. Later on, the rules have been improved by implementing flexible work time, building nursing facilities, establishing countering harassment, and work-life balance efforts. These rules also include leaves for spouses based on the necessity of understanding and support from the family members. In addition, the headquarters for WPS promotion in Japan, Ministry of Defense, was established last year as one of the efforts in this field. In this slide, I'd like to talk how the opportunity for female personnel has been advanced. In the past, the assignments for female were restricted due to the physical burden. However, the MSDF removed all assignment restrictions in 2018. I'd like to correct one thing about this slide. 2023, it says first female Admiral operator, but actually first Vice Admiral from logistics and first Rear Admiral from operator is correct. I believe that this expansion of female assignments is the outcome of huge efforts of all females who accomplished their duties in their assignments with not only being aware of their responsibility, but also resulting in the tangible achievement. Oops. Now I will explain about our initiative to promote WPS in JMOD. We established JMOD WPS promotion plan in April this year, and that includes 1. Change of mindset. 2. Structural development. 3. International cooperation. And 4. Reflection of gender perspective in JSDF activities. Details are shown on the screen. Personally, I think it is remarkable that the fourth pillar includes our specific activities such as ISO, PKO, TLJNO, it means transferring, rescuing Japanese national overseas, and HADR. These activities are indicated in the plan from peacetime to contingency. Now, I would like to talk about how, in particular, we incorporate gender perspectives in disaster relief operations. As you may know, Japan is such a disaster-prone country. We recognize that we are experienced military in HADL operations, but we do cherish the gender perspectives in protection for vulnerable people, such as women, children, elderly, and handicapped people. We try to understand their practical needs, as their needs may vary based on their own situations. As GMSDF, we appropriately take care of them by separating areas, including nursing rooms, and educating our members in advance to improve our operations. In international disaster relief operations, we provide pre-education for our members in terms of cultures and religions in the area they will be deployed. For your reference, this is a pamphlet with some checklists with gender perspective by Japanese government. It is one of the lessons learned from the Great Eastern Earthquake in 2011. That includes appropriate preparation in advance, cooperation with women's organizations and civil societies, preventing violation against women, ensuring evacuation life, and women's participation in reconstruction phase. In conclusion, this is my own perspective, but I will talk about the changes and the challenges in JMSDF. First, regarding the changes of JMSDF culture. From my experience in JMSDF for 28 years, we have been improving the mindset, accepting female members, and cultivating the atmosphere to be sensitive against harassment. Second, as for the challenges, number one, as Japan experiences declining birth rate and aging population, it will be a severe situation for JSDF in recruiting and retaining. This means that female presence and participation would be more significant in our organization. Number two, we must promote utilizing the regulations and the systems that enable the female members to be recruited and retained. Number three, considering females' career, we need to improve our skill and experience continuously. It is sometimes difficult for female officers to keep it due to their lifetime events. We must consider how we complement their experience and skills as military officers, as future leaders, including keeping their motivations. Number four, in Japan, even though we have been conscious about the vulnerable people by nature, we must try to understand and distinguish more clearly gender perspectives, or WPS. Number five, it is a challenge for us navies to define our own WPS and gender perspectives, such as in which mission or in what kind of situation, as we are different from the Army that is more familiar to women peace security in the context of conflict-related issues. Looking at the security environment in recent years, our activities are becoming more international, cooperating with other countries, and conducted in a joint manner. This means we must incorporate gender perspectives to enhance our operations. In the NATO WPS office, I was in charge of gender mainstreaming in maritime domain. And I started a research project on WPS in maritime domain, and the research clearly revealed that it is essential for navies to understand gender perspectives. I am currently researching about cooperative security to get a master's degree, and I think mutual understanding of each culture and diversity is important for national security. As I mentioned earlier, and as an active duty Navy officer, how we define WPS in the Navy and how to use gender perspectives in our operations would be the next step. I believe it is a great opportunity to share and discuss the views and experiences among navies in this kind of multilateral symposium in terms of WPS in maritime security. I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you to Captain Junko Kawashima. I'd like to pull it all together because I think you brought us full circle there in a couple different ways. I was listening all morning to the types of conversations they had, and when you think about women, peace, and security and broader human security, where do all the humans live? They live on land. So as Junko was saying, she was tasked with looking at WPS in the maritime environment, which is the uniqueness of our topic here. I didn't hear IUUF fishing talked about much this morning, or even a lot of HADR. You heard about gender-based violence and types of boots on the ground, types of gender issues. So that's the uniqueness of our panel. And then we talked about a variety of different ways, in addition to kind of that warfighting aspect, that the the maritime forces and the types of missions that we may be encountering the female population. But with a thread that kind of weaved through all of yours, it wasn't just about women and girls, it was all vulnerable populations and human security. When you have a factor that is affecting the entire population, it's affecting everyone. And we don't want to forget about the rest of the population, even though we're looking at this particular subset. And then one thing, especially with our last two speakers, the real need to recruit and apply the skill sets of a whole population, especially if you're looking at demographic challenges within your country, which a lot of countries around the world are. That's a really important part of drawing on the talent pool you have to meet your country's national security needs. So those are my kind of inclusive thoughts tying everyone together. I'm gonna kind of give some closing thoughts. I've also been in the Navy for 28 years. And so in Japan, you have a trend line up of women participating in your maritime forces. You're at 26% in the Argentine Navy. And my reflection is, when I joined, it was 20%. And I am sitting here 28 years later thinking that number would be higher, and we're still at 20%. And what we've had is a rich discussion today of all the different ways women are in the maritime environment, protected by the maritime environment, or in the maritime force. And these are important things that, as a former president of the Naval War College said, once you put the gender lens on, if you can see those things and why they're important to our advantage and our warfighting and our ability to do mission, you never take it off. It's just one of those things you can't unsee. And if we're only 20% of the force, we need 100% of the force to actually kind of look at these issues, see their strategic importance and their operational and tactical importance, and then carry that forward through our leadership positions. That's my final thought on the issue. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today. It's been such an incredible panel. So to Maryruth Belsey Priebe, Carrie Compton, Vice Admiral Martinez, and Captain Junko Kawashima. I just call her Junko because we're old friends. Thank you again for joining us. A round of applause for our panel today. And for all of us, it's been an incredible day at the WPS Symposium, and we look forward to you rejoining us tomorrow morning for day 2 of this event. Thank you.